we meet in an hour of change and challenge, in a decade of hope and fear, in an age of both knowledge and ignorance. If this capsule history of our progress teaches us anything, it is that man in his quest for knowledge and progress is determined and cannot be deterred. Because that goal will serve to organize and measure the best of our energies and skills. Because that challenge is one that we're willing to accept, one we are unwilling to postpone, and one we intend to win.
Hey, I'm John Chaplin. You're listening to the Energy Impact Podcast. Today, we're here with Lissie Garvin, the Foundation and Fellowship Director of the 776 Foundation. Lizzie, welcome, and thank you for hopping on.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here and to chat today.
Yeah, looking forward to kind of diving down into your background. Usually, where we like to start out with is just talking about where you started and kind of where you grew up.
Yeah, absolutely. I I grew up in Omaha, Nebraska, so not a lot of people grow up in Nebraska, but I really loved it there. All of my family is still there. Omaha is home. And I started out my career actually working in private equity. I really wanted to live in San Francisco because it was like 10, 11, 12 years ago when tech was like really starting to boom, social media. And I was like, I want to be in that city, like aside from the fact that it's beautiful and like very liberal and amazing, but I wanted to be there for work. And I remember Reddit was hiring for an executive assistant role. And I was like, I'm just going to interview and then I'm going to make my way onto like the event team or marketing team. Like this is just going to be my in to the social media Silicon Valley world. And I remember interviewing with Alexis Ohanian. And at the time, I think there were 45 employees. He and Steve had just returned after stepping away from the company for 10 years. And so this was their first time back and first time being back together. And I was one of the first hires that they made. And I remember a few months into the job, Alexis gave me a chief of staff job description. And he was like, do you mind reading through this? I'm going to start interviewing for a chief of staff. And I was like, can I interview for this job? Like, is this like, can I also put my hat in the ring? And he was like, absolutely, job is yours. And ever since then, so that was 8 years ago, I was his chief of staff at, I guess, 3 different companies, which ultimately led to this foundation director role.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah. I mean, I guess what kind of drew you into seeking private equity at first and then really kind of targeting Reddit after that?
Yeah, the company that I worked at, it was called Thoma Bravo, and I didn't really know that much about that world, to be totally honest. But I remember when I was going through the interview rounds and when I met with Orlando Bravo, whose firm it is, he was just so compassionate and charismatic and like wanted to also do a lot of good, which I feel like is rare in the finance world. And he's from Puerto Rico and he's done so much for Puerto Rico and has this nonprofit. And I was just like very motivated and excited by that kind of leader. And ultimately, that's the same type of leadership that I see in Alexis. So it's more, I think I was more drawn to the leader than the actual business itself.
Okay. So yeah, looking for more someone who's mission driven to kind of join onto the mission and kind of propel it forward.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Well, yeah, tell me more about 776 Foundation. And I guess you're also part of the 776 Venture Fund, which I guess the foundation is a spinoff of that. But give us a little bit more background about that.
Yeah, so the fund started almost 3 years ago. So Alexis very publicly, when George Floyd was murdered, Alexis very publicly stepped away from Reddit, the board, and had asked to be replaced with a Black board member, and ultimately left, this company that he had started when he was 20, 21 years old. And at that same time, we were talking a lot about building companies from first principles, what it looks like, who you're making money for in terms of LPs, all of these things. And he ultimately decided to leave his first venture fund, Initialized Capital, which he had founded, and start this new venture fund, 776. And myself and Caitlin Holloway, who had been the VP of People and Culture at Reddit, we left Initialized with him to launch the fund. And the fund, yeah, so it's now 3 years old. And all the while, we'll call it the last 6 years, Alexis and I have always talked about what would be next in my career after I was a chief of staff, because the reality is you can't be a chief of staff for forever. And the thing that always motivated me was everything that he was doing that was good in the world. And I think it's very rare to have someone who has not only like the means, the dollars to do good, but also has the platform to like share and get people excited. So I was always really motivated by that. And, you know, whether it was being on the Hill campaigning for paid family leave, or now launching this climate fellowship, that was what I was really excited about. And when he approached me about the foundation, and the mission of the foundation is to fight inequity worldwide and start with this climate pledge, I was like a 100% yes, like no questions asked.
Yeah, it's awesome kind of platform, right, for the fellowship, you know, who you guys are targeting and kind of the investments there. I'd love to dive a little bit more detail around that, because I'm pretty interested in, you know, one, how you guys kind of vet the, I guess, the ideas or the companies that some of your fellows plan to start, but then also how you vet someone, you know, who's very early on and young, really in their career, and whether they have what it takes to kind of become a fellow.
Yeah, there are so many different parts to this question. So, I mean, the reality is there's nothing else out there like this program. And that is what I have heard over the last year. I mean, we're only a year into the foundation. The fellowship program is 10 months old. So we're still like so early on. But the thing that I keep hearing, it doesn't exist. We're the only ones doing it. And there is like a massive need for it. I mean, the reality is these young people, so just to give everyone some background, we write grants to 20 young people a year. They're 18 to 23 years old all over the world. And they are working on projects to combat climate change. And Alexis pledged $20 million over the next 10 years. So this program will go on for 10 years, which is really amazing to think that we'll have 200 young people working on projects, whether they're climate tech companies or nonprofits, or doing research just to focus on fighting climate change. But we really, the thing that has been so amazing to watch is how different all of the projects are. Like, we have a fellow who's in California and she's working on wildfire technology. Or we have a fellow who's in Kenya and he's built these solar powered refrigerated storage units for farmers to make their produce last. I think it's ending up being like 20 times longer than they normally would. He's got it deployed at 30,000 farms across Kenya. So the impact that they're having with just $100,000 is amazing and incredible. And you asked about the process, which I get really excited to talk about. So, like I said, we're only one cohort in, so still a lot of learnings, but I copied this from the fund. We do a blind process. So we keep the application open for about 3 weeks, and it's just essay based for the application plus a video submission. And I don't want to like read a resume. I don't want to know where you went to university. I don't want to know any of that information. And the reality is some of them are like 18, 19 years old, so they don't have much of a resume. But I just want to know like what you're working on in climate, and also like more importantly, what motivated you to get into this space. Because if the goal is that they're going to spend the next 10, 20, 30 years on these projects, like I want them to be so motivated to stay in the space and keep building. And not give up, because it can be a lonely road to be a founder. So I think it's more about like why they are getting into the space, what happened in their life to motivate them to do that. And then the submissions. We just opened applications actually for our second cohort, so they're open for another couple of weeks, and I'm already
awesome.
I'm starting to read them, and I'm very excited.
That's great. So I guess who were some of the, you highlighted a few, but how many were in the first cohort, and what are some of the companies that they started?
Yeah, absolutely. So each cohort will be 20 fellows, and they're with us for 2 years. So the program itself is a 2-year program. And yeah, like I said, we have Valkyrie, who's in California doing fire technology. And we have a young woman, her name's Maya Penn. She's been a climate activist since she was 8 years old. I think she did her first TED Talk at 11 or 12.
Oh.
Yeah, that's like, what was I doing at 12 years old? Absolutely not that.
Not a TED Talk. Yeah.
But she's built this studio for animated programming for children to teach them about climate change at like the earliest age possible. She actually just announced that she is doing a short animated film that Viola Davis is producing, and Whoopi Goldberg is one of the voices. So she just shared the trailer a few weeks ago. But so they're all doing like very different things. We have another one, his name is Rostam, and his company is called Hydrova. And basically, this is like a little bit more technical. So when you have an aluminum can, we like all assume that can be recycled. And the reality is, like, the writing on the outside of the can or the droplets that are left in the can, like that can't go to recycling. That actually ends up in landfill. It gets created into this thing called dross, and the dross is what goes to landfill. And it's a small percentage, I think like 8% of the can, but the reality is when that like piles up and continues to go to landfill, like that's actually taking up a lot of space. And so he and his co-founder have made this technology that essentially takes that dross and puts it through a process to make low carbon cement.
Oh, awesome. Wow, that's such a great, unique problem to go out and solve, right?
Well, totally. And the thing that Rostam said the other day that is so true, and I think, I've heard from a lot of these fellows, they can only solve one issue. Like they can't solve everything that's happening in the climate crisis, but they have to have the feeling that other people are working on the other issues so that they can focus on like the one specific thing that they want to go out and fix. So the reality is we need so many more people working on things.
Well, yeah, I think so. It sounds like you guys are filtering for, someone who's got a passion about a problem, and that's kind of one of your main filtering criteria. It sounds like they've already kind of started developing it. This wouldn't be going from an idea stage. Some of them have already gotten some traction.
Well, so some of them are definitely in idea phase. Like we have a few that are in research labs developing technology, and the grant money is funding that research that they're doing. It's not majority, but they're definitely probably like 5 of the fellows are doing that. And I don't think I can share what they're working on because it's confidential, but that is important to say. Like definitely some of them are in research phase.
Okay.
Just came and pitched an idea that they had. And most of them, the $100,000 is the first amount of cash that they've received.
Oh, awesome. So I guess beyond cash, how does 776 really like support these fellows and, take them through that 2-year kind of fellowship cohort phase?
Yeah, my background, because I was in the startup world. I was working for a 10-year-old startup, Reddit.
Right.
But also because I was in the VC space for so long. I mean, and the biggest thing is I've had a front row seat to watching one of the greatest founders and investors. I mean, I've sat in every single meeting with Alexis, and I think a lot of people pay to go to business school to get that knowledge and information, and I'm really lucky in that I had 8 years of it. And so we do a lot of one-on-one mentoring with them, and then we bring them together in person from all around the world once a year, which we just had our first summit in February, and it was amazing. They all got to meet each other for the first time. They all flew together. And then on top of that, we have software called Cerebro that I joke is Alexis's brainchild, but it's internal software that we built to run the fund so that the fund can always be remote, but the foundation and the fellows also have access to it.
Okay, yeah. I mean, those are tremendous value. Just the network effects for some, especially as young as some of you your guys' fellowship participants are, being able to have access to that, I'm sure. And then also, like you said, being a founder is pretty lonely, right? And being in a cohort where you
Totally.
have 19 other founders that are working on similar problems or at similar stages is good to lean on.
Yeah, and we do a monthly speaker series where we bring in, whether it's like a climate tech VC or a scientist, like we try to each month rotate what different background they have based on like who in the fellowship can join. And I think that like making this like community network for the fellows, like you said, at such a young age is so important.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess, you've got one cohort down. How do you kind of see this growing, especially as you guys are starting to review some of this next class?
Yeah, so the fellowship will go on for 10 years, so we will have 200 fellows, which is amazing. And I think that the cohorts will be very similar. I imagine there will be youth activists, there will be climate tech founders, there will be researchers, because all of those different genres are so important in this fight for climate change and making things better. So I think the cohorts will stay the same. I think the size will probably stay the same because it's really important for me and what I can see is happening in this group of fellows to be really close with one another and be able to have like a community where they can connect and relate. After we did the summit, I heard from so many of them and they were like, how did you choose all of us? Like, how did you know that we were all going to get along so well? Like, these people are like family to me now. And like, I want to make sure that is the case for every cohort. And I think the biggest thing will be once we start to have classes that graduate and making sure there's still that community and just, I don't know, we're going to have this massive Gen Z group of climate changers.
Yeah. So I guess through all the ones that you guys have reviewed and have you seen any kind of, I guess, themes with what people are trying to go after? It's obviously climate focused, but do you see kind of any sub themes below that everyone's focused on?
Yeah, so we're still receiving applications, and the fellows are taking they're doing the first 2 rounds. So the way that we have it built in Cerebro, of course, is that they are blind applications. So the fellows can only see the essays right now. And then they vote, and we have like 3 fellows per category. But I was looking at categories this morning actually to see what is like been the most, and it's actually sustainable fashion.
Oh,
Seeing
interesting.
a lot in fashion. Yeah. Which, makes sense because it is one of the most alarming things happening in the world right now. So yeah, definitely have seen a lot of sustainable fashion.
Okay, so a lot of sustainable fashion. Is there any been energy focused kind of ventures or people that are trying to start anything in the energy space?
Yeah, definitely a lot of energy. I mean, it's really everything. I can pull it up and look right now. A lot of pollution and waste reduction,
Hmm.
and energy, and then food and agriculture, and then also a lot of climate activists. So
Awesome.
basically all of the things, all of the things that we need and want.
Right. And like you were saying earlier, I think it's good to get more of a discrete problem and go after that, and then just have confidence that there's other smart people working on all the rest of the problems, and we're all marching to kind of the same end goal, right? Which is
Yeah.
a net zero future.
Yeah, absolutely. And I will say with this first cohort, there isn't that much overlap of what everyone is working on. I think we weren't like very strategic in that, but also wanted to make sure we had representation in different climate categories. And I think that that's been really good for the fellows because they're learning so much from one another. And they also get to be experts in their own fields and like teach the other fellows. Also, I feel like I'm learning so much from them. Every one-on-one I have, I'm like, wait, can you go back and explain that process again? Like I like tell it to me like I'm 5 because I've never heard of that before. So I feel like it's been really good to make sure there's a wide range of different climate topics, which I imagine we'll do the same for the second cohort.
Awesome. And I think I did see that it was a global fellowship, right? So it's not just focused on the US. Are you guys seeing a lot of traction globally as well?
Yeah, absolutely. So in this first cohort, we have someone in Kenya, South Africa, Scotland, let's see, France, Canada, India, Australia, and then definitely a handful in the US. And a lot of our fellows in the US are first generation Americans.
Okay, wow.
Yeah.
Awesome. So yeah, you guys are already seeing kind of a full spread of different countries and areas that you go after.
Yeah, I mean, the reality is it has to be an international program because climate change is a global issue.
Mhm.
That was very important to us for the fellowship program.
Yeah, and you'll see in all parts of the world, they're going to have different problems that are, the highest value to go after. So people from those areas are going to know exactly what that is.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, great. Yeah. I mean, I guess beyond that, is there with 776, are you guys planning on kind of backing some of these fellowship participants, after their 2 years? How do you guys see that brand kind of assisting?
Yeah, well, so I am now fully no longer in the fund, just the
Okay.
foundation. But Alexis and I, we've been talking about this one a lot. As of now, they're fully church and state, so like no pitching, because we wanted to make sure that it always felt fair and equal and didn't want to like fund one and not the other, all of those things. So
Mhm.
right now it's fully church and state. I could see a world in which the foundation is an investor for some of them, where it's like we give the $100,000 grant, which is also really important to mention. So it's just grant money. We don't take any ownership in any of these companies.
Okay.
But I could see a world in which maybe after that, then we, as the foundation, invest in the company. And so that money goes back into the foundation.
Gotcha. Gotcha. Okay. Yeah. I mean, I think that makes sense. I didn't realize it was a grant for some reason. I thought it was equity investment, but that's
Yeah,
really
yeah.
helpful
Yeah, no, it's really important to make that clear because a lot of the fellows have said to me, like, it's so important that like I didn't have to give up any of my ownership of my company like that early on, and that I could just build and like take the $100,000 and not have to think about giving up 8%, 12%, or whatever it is.
Mhm.
So yeah, definitely a very important distinction between grant and investment money.
Okay. Yeah. So I guess going forward as you guys kind of scale this out, I mean, and you're managing these young fellows, what do you feel like is going to be some of the key areas they'll focus on in the future? And how do you kind of see them expanding some of these companies?
Yeah, absolutely. We have one fellow, she is building these robotic synthetic biology labs. So basically, she has an amazing story. You should talk to her at some point. Her name is Roya, and her company is called Trilo Bio. But she was 12 years old and living in Seattle and really became obsessed with biology and wanted to be in a lab. She saw a poster for a university in Seattle that was doing these synthetic biology labs. And so she pretended to be a college student and joined the lab. I think she was 13 or 14
Oh, wow.
and was in the lab for like 6 months. And they had to they were submitting their research for something and they had to fill out their birthdays. And it became very obvious that she was not a college student in that moment. And ever since that, she's started to work on this company, and they basically are trying to solve the issue of not having human error while you're doing research, so that like companies like Beyond, Impossible, whatever, can make like these lab grown meats faster and cheaper, and we can bring more people into not eating meat and things like that. And so I think that's all to say that I think that world, like the science world, and moving faster and more affordable and bringing more people in, I think that will be a big push in the next 10 years, cow 2.0.
Okay. Yeah. It's just so interesting to hear the stories of, someone so young taking kind of just the initiative to really push that forward, I'm sure that's what you guys are seeing across all of these cohorts.
I mean, and I feel like that's what I have said to each of them after they're like, how did you pick like the 20 of us? And I'm like, because you all were so motivated. All of your stories were like, I want to spend the next 20 years building in this space, fixing this. Like, I want this to be my life's work. And I think that if you're going to start a company, if you're going to be a founder, if you're going to have a nonprofit, I mean, you just have to have that energy and you have to have that mentality, because you're about to pour so much time and effort into this thing.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I mean, it's a huge commitment, but seeing someone that has such a passion for it so young, I'm sure that's basically the best indicator that they're going to be successful at it. But yeah, very, very interesting. I'd love to hear just even more stories. I'm sure every single one in the cohort has an interesting story just like that.
Yeah, they are really amazing. I feel like, so a lot of them are definitely in like stealth mode. And then like we have another one, her name is Ayaka. She's in South Africa, and she's basically built out this programming for schools across South Africa, elementary schools, and it's climate programming, because none of the schools were teaching about climate change. And so she essentially built in this for their studies. And then we have another fellow who started a climate justice youth fund, because I think it's 0.76% of climate funding goes to these youth initiatives, which is an insanely small amount when you're looking at who is leading the climate movement. It's all Gen Z. I mean, you have Greta, like they are the ones that are like putting this in the news. They're putting this at the forefront. And so the fact that only 0.76% goes to them is insane. So Nathan, he started this fund to start to deploy capital to different areas across the world that need it. So yeah, there's so many of, there's 20 of them, and they're all so amazing.
Yeah, I know. They all have great stories.
20 more soon.
Yeah, I'm sure it's just it's awesome to see people in the young Gen Z generation kind of take this on and really try to solve these problems. I wish we could see as much enthusiasm in probably the older generations, but good to see them kind of taking the initiative.
Yeah, I feel like I always say that I'm 34 years old, and I don't know about you, but I feel like a lot of people my age and older, it's very like doom and gloom about climate change. And then I go and have a one-on-one with one of my fellows, and it's the exact opposite of that. They're like so motivated, so excited, and they're like, oh my God, my research worked. Like, I'm moving on to the next step. Like, I'm gonna fight this thing and we're gonna win. And so I think it's been really important and like good for my mind to be around this younger generation who is like, we don't have a choice. This is the only option, and like we're gonna have to fix it because no one else is.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think it's definitely can be invigorating. We have fellows here and they're awesome to, have around and bring that energy. But yeah, I'm really looking forward to kind of seeing as these guys get out of stealth mode, where they go, and as kind of you guys onboard more cohorts and they develop their products and their companies, what change they kind of affect in the world.
Yeah, I know. I'm so curious to see 5 years from now, like the important work that they're all doing. I mean, the fact is they're already doing so much important work and they're already having huge impact on their communities. And so, yeah, I'm just as excited to see, and then I'm going to take credit for all of their success.
Of course. So I guess, as a plug kind of for the cohort, when is applications due for this latest one?
Yes, so applications are due April 24th, so about 2 weeks left, and it probably takes about 20 minutes to do the application, so it's pretty quick. You just have to be somewhere where you can record a video. But yeah, if you're 18 to 23, please apply, especially if you're working on a climate change idea or project. It just has to be an idea, or it can be a company or a nonprofit.
Well, awesome. Well, yeah, I hope you guys get even more awesome cohorts to kind of evaluate. And yeah, like I said, looking forward to seeing where it develops and the community that you guys develop. I think it'll be great.
Yeah, amazing. You need to talk to some of the fellows. They absolutely should be guests on this. They're so amazing, so impressive.
Yeah, I think we'd love, maybe we could talk about that after and get a few names that we could talk to.
Yeah, amazing. I love that.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Lizzie, for hopping on, and yeah, we'll talk soon.
Amazing. Thank you. It was nice to meet you.
Nice meeting you too.
Our leadership in science and industry, our hopes for peace and security, our obligations to ourselves as well as others, all require us to make this effort, to solve these mysteries, to solve them for the good of all men and for the progress of all people.